Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, former producer of the ADHD Skills Lab. I'm thrilled to introduce my latest project, the Neurodivergent Report, an educational podcast dedicated to empowering neurodivergent individuals with accessible scientific knowledge and amplifying their exuberant stories. In each episode, we'll explore topics like the genetics and heritability of neurodiversity, alongside practical strategies for managing executive dysfunction and emotional dysregulation. Together, we can learn to heal in community. However you are able to engage, thank you for being here. Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, host of the Neurodivergent Report.
And I'm JQ Walker, her co-conspirator, co-host for the Neurodivergent Report.
We are so glad you are here today. We are just about to start sort of a multi-parter episode. Definitely excitement is warranted. Essentially we were like, hey, we're just starting this research podcast. Maybe we might want to talk about what is neurodivergence.
Yeah.
So welcome to Neurodivergence 101, the very beginning of the theoretical showdown.
Which, so fun. That's what this is. We're going to be comparing kind of different theories of neurodiversity. And this is just the beginning.
Yeah. This episode is very heavy, like in constructions and what are we measuring? Mm-hmm. What are we talking about? Mm-hmm. I think these are very important questions.
Right.
Welcome.
Yeah, like just to get everybody on the same page. Yeah,
definitely. I love that we're trying to be very self-aware of niche knowledge. That's really helpful here. And I think I'm going to start by sharing the adapted Fred Rogers quote that I put in our notes document.
Yes.
Because this is sort of how I feel about life in general and like why I'm doing this work. But so the original quote is, we can do a whole lot for children if we could only show them that feelings are mentionable and manageable. And I think that we can do a whole lot for community if we can show people that feelings are mentionable and manageable and give them the tools that will help them go out and do the thing.
Just that.
To manage how to cope.
And I think that more and more this is becoming something that is a given for a lot of people, but it's something that I feel like you and I would agree, like it's such like an obvious thing, and it's just it's not always the reality, and sometimes even for people that can know that in theory, sometimes it's hard to always stay true to that in practice. But
totally.
Yeah,
totally. And I think it's important to mention too that feelings are emotions, but feelings can also be like sensations that you experience as a result of sensory overstimulation or, something like that. So it's just, I just want to help everybody learn how to accommodate themselves and have the courage to do so. And the more of us that are able to do this in public, like the more normalized it becomes.
Yes.
And the more options are available, for sensory toys and things like that. Like in my lifetime, I've seen the fidget toy market explode.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's like the last 10 years specifically it's been popping off. Like first with like the fidget spinners, but it's just gone from there. Yeah.
So that brings us to our first and only paper of today, because I found two papers on this topic, and then I was like, ooh, we don't have enough time to talk about both of them in one episode.
Yeah,
it's sort of a dense topic, and it's all important, so I don't want to skim it. So we're just going to talk about one paper today, and that's fine. It's called From Neurodiversity to Neurodivergence, the Role of Epistemic and Cognitive Marginalization.
Mm-hmm.
And this was published in 2021. Published in 2021 by Synthesis, I don't know, an international journal for epistemology, methodology, and philosophy of science. Jay, do you want to go ahead and tell us what is this paper? What is this paper trying to do?
With pleasure. So, this paper is challenging kind of the current understanding that most people have about neurodivergence. Namely, I feel like ADHD and autism, because those have disorder at the end of them, and changing
Mm-hmm.
the conversation from neurodiversity being a disorder, and rather it's just plainly diversity in the human genome, and talking about how there can also be social supports put in order that can help people not feel like they have to adapt to their environment, and instead have their environment in some ways adapt to them, and just get the accommodations that would just help them go through life.
Yeah. Yeah, this paper is written by, well, they have at least one ADHD and autistic person on their writing team.
Mhm.
So I love that that perspective was included intentionally.
We can cut this, but I thought it was so funny before. We were like looking through it. I'm like, oh, there's a whole section on, you're like, there's a whole section on context. So there's definitely a neurodivergent person on board writing this.
Yes. I wish that more papers had like a glossary of terms actually, because I get
Yeah.
really frustrated with just the indiscriminate usage of terms like I'm sorry, that construct is already taken. Please pick a new username. Like why
Yeah.
can't we do that? Or at least force them into the groups that we already have. Like this is
Right.
again why meta-analyses and like big large scale study analyses struggle, because we don't
Yeah.
have proper terms defined.
Yeah, I know it was a joke, but that idea of like, if there's a name it's already taken, like either become like a sub like category under that idea, or just pick a different name. Like let's that I love that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, but this paper is super important because it talks about the epistemic injustice, which is really just another word for like resource inequity.
Mhm.
Really just another term for like people have different amounts of stuff. I don't know. Everybody's
Yeah.
environment is not the same. So this paper is like a theoretical paper. It's not a research study that happened. It's not qualitative research or anything like that. It's just sort of they're trying to do the philosophical work here in
Yeah.
defining the constructs. So they talk about a bunch of stuff.
This paper more goes into the theory, and they go into a lot of different ideas. We'll touch on all of these more in detail as we go, but they talk firstly about a few different models about how to approach what neurodiversity is. They also talk about the 4E mechanism, which talks about epistemic injustice and marginalization that creates neurodivergence out of neurodiversity, which again we will go into more detail with. And as a side note, for people that hear
Mm-hmm.
4E and are wondering if it's related to 2E, they're a little bit different. 2E is just describing, it stands for twice exceptional, and that relates to ADHD because it's how you describe someone who's both neurodivergent and gifted, because those are two exceptional things to be happening, because it's not in the it's not super common that but 4E is
Yeah.
talking about more of the different ways that cognition uh, is different in neurotypical brains and neurodivergent brains. Is there anything else that they're kind of going through in this paper that I missed? Or
I imagine that we'll go through very specific examples as we,
right?
I think that's great. I'm just going to throw in that our researcher who is helping us with this
Yes.
knew that this was not, she said to me, "Where did you get this paper?" And she said she knew it was not a medical journal because the language that was being used and the overall structure of the paper just screamed philosophy. And so when I told her where it came from, she was like, "Oh my goodness, that makes so much sense."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So where to begin?
Yeah, I think I'm going to bounce back to the actual paper real quick and just scroll to the context and clarification section
I'll meet you there.
because that's where they start to tease apart the idea of neurodiversity versus neurodivergence.
Mm.
They say sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, which is a mistake.
Mhm.
Even the person who originally came up with those constructs will tell you that neurodivergence is meant to reflect the individual's differences, and neurodiversity is meant to reflect everybody's is different. Um, Sort of, I like, I have ADHD, but I am not diverse. I'm divergent. My brain does things that is outside of the expected. It's
Yeah.
extraordinary. Anyway, with that rabbit hole,
Okay.
we fell in. So the bottom line is that this part of their paper is where the really pedantic discussion of terms happens.
Mhm.
And they do talk about Judy Singer, who's the person who came out with the neurodiversity. However, they criticize this movement because they say it's not immune to mechanisms of exclusion. So, their main criticism of the term neurodivergence is that they say neurodivergence belongs to a normative vocabulary. So
Mhm.
it requires like a normal concept, like the
Neurotypical.
yes, that is what we've been calling it. But they disagree with the ability to classify someone as normal and not normal because there's like a there's just a number of different ways that can show up.
Mhm.
Uh,
And, like, this might be like, I know that I keep making, like, analogies, and I've said this before, to, like, blood type and eye color and just other, like, other instances of diversity in the human genome, but it's the kind of thing where, like, if brown eyes was, like, seen as normal, and then if you had, like, blue or green eyes, it's like, okay, that's being divergent from the norm. And oh, like, you like, sunglasses aren't really a thing that a lot of people wear because people with brown eyes, like, they do better with, like, blocking out sunlight, like, and like, if imagine, like, if that was, like, kind of like the normal way we talked about eyes, and that would, like, do you know what I'm saying?
yes. Yes, I mean, and the only reason that they're even talking about this is because they go on to say, like, who even came up with the concept of normal and who gets to decide,
Exactly.
like restrict the behavior, which again is just a very neurodivergent perspective. Like most people never
Yeah.
actually question why we do things the way we do them,
Yeah, and, like, to tie it
which
kind
is
of back to the
inherent.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, just because, it goes into this later in the paper, like, I think a lot of people would attribute, like, the majority to be the norm, but that then leads to, uh, epistemic injustices, which is exactly what this is about. Like, if you're just catering only to the dominant group, like, all the people in the minority are still people, and no matter what percentage it is, like, there are still people who will not be, being accommodated for, and they're not able to live their lives the way that they need to. um yeah.
This is true. And you don't even have to know that you are a neurodivergent like to
Yeah.
know. Sorry, you don't even have to know that you're a neurodivergent in order to suffer from the
Yes.
consequences of being a neurodivergent. Like,
Yeah.
you can call yourself whatever you want, but if you display ADHD behaviors, you will be stigmatized for your ADHD behaviors, um, especially if you're unaware of them.
Yeah, and, like, to go even, like, further with that, usually it makes life worse if you are not aware, and
Yeah.
then just, you know
What is wrong with me? Why am
yeah,
I like this and nobody
yeah.
else?
Right. Why is
Yeah.
it so easy, for everybody, or seemingly for everybody
Not
else?
having the language for RSD or
Oh my
imposter
god.
syndrome
Oh
or
my god.
like sensory meltdown.
Yeah.
I feel like these are just things that I'm teaching my children, but
Yeah.
I only discovered as an adult.
Right.
And
And I think that a lot of that a lot of that comes with like then second guessing yourself, even if you get diagnosed, even if you understand these terms that we're talking about, like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD, talking about just having like a meltdown, like what that is, like even at least I've experienced this, and I've heard people talk about this too, where it's like even if you know what it is and you know that that's like just that's just part of your brain's package, still feeling like, but am I like is this not okay? Like, am I leaning into this too much? Am I being too sensitive? You know, all this like negative self talk that's been given from outside sources.
Yeah, definitely. I actually think it would be valuable to stop and define like a social norm.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
we say things like that and like socio-normative and like,
Yeah.
do
And
we
we're like, we
even,
get it,
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah. But like, I mean, okay, so just a little pit stop.
Yes.
My
Pit
absolutely
stop.
favorite college class was the constructs of deviance.
Mm,
And so even before I knew about neurodivergence, I knew about deviance. And
mhm,
I always knew I was different and I loved people who were different also. But I also knew that like some people who were different were like lovable and joyful, and some of them were like mean and abusive. And so
mhm,
like I learned how to tell the difference between the two as best as I could.
mhm.
But anyway, so a norm is basically just an accepted behavior. It's
Yeah.
normal behavior.
Yeah.
That's it. Um
And I'm assuming most of the time, does that come from like just most people would do things this way, or like some
It
kind of
just
like,
becomes the accepted social construct. The like
mm,
the because you get stigmatized if you don't do it. You get like pushed out of the society if you don't conform.
mhm,
And since we are social beings, we've been sort of trained and conditioned to behave in ways that will keep us part of the group. Yeah. And so, like, when I first started coming up with this podcast and like trying to name it, and I first thought of the name neurodeviant, but someone told me that that sounded like pervert. So I was like, I guess let's not.
I
Let's
feel
go
like
with
deviant
like an.
has like that like undertone to it, even though it just purely means to deviate. But
I know, and whatever. I guess
yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah,
But I decided to go with an already accepted construct. Okay, so I chose neurodivergent instead of neurodiversity because neurodivergent to me is focused on the individual.
hmm,
Neurodiversity is focused on the collection of divergences, all the different types of divergence.
but it's not even just that. It also includes the people who are the quote unquote norm, because just talk about diversity, which would include the norm.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Is that also why they thought that neurodiversity was better?
I'm assuming because so later on they talk about the neurodiversity approach,
Yeah.
which is really because a quick sidebar then, because I want to start with like the medical model, then do the strong social model, and then talk about the neurodiversity approach.
I think that's a good idea. What I will say about these is yes, these models are different ways of looking at the neurodiversity, and they're different ways of like, they're basically different schools of thought. Like the medical model looks at neurodivergence as like a disability, and the social model looks at society as the
Yes.
disabled one. Like
Yes.
society is causing the disability. And then these authors are trying to orient themselves in the middle somewhere, which is a really thoughtful and well balanced approach.
Hmm. The neurodiversity approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like you just kind of touched on both of those. Yeah, the medical model just being kind of what we're used to, having neurodiversity being labeled as a disorder, like
Yeah.
attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum disorder. I'm just reading at this point. So treating them as like a disease or disorder, and the characteristics of those quote unquote disorders should be something that should be addressed and ideally lessened.
The
Would you
behaviors
agree?
treated out. Yeah, that's
Yes.
usually the goal under the medical model. Um,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's sort of what we're seeing a return to in with this administration. But I
Yeah.
hope that this is just a little blip in our radar,
We're
because we
hoping.
really have started to move away from that. I mean, the social model is also like a little harsh, but I am more in favor of this than the individual blame game.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, like, society doesn't have to bend to every single person's whim. Like, that's not
Yes.
a realistic situation.
Right.
But we
But
can
that yeah.
alter society to be more accepting of alternatives and a slowness.
Yes.
Like, I just want to take my time.
Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like the same can be said about really any kind of deviance. And also, we can cut this if this is like going off on too many tangents. But yeah, the same could be said, I feel like, about really any deviance. Like, like, if people are not heterosexual, there is a fear from the normative group that that's just going to take over everything, and it's just asking for a space just to be the way that they are. And it's not like they're like, okay, we're eradicating your way of being. um and I think that, so this paper is, it's talking about a similar thing where the medical model is, demonizing it, similarly to how homosexuality was in the DSM. And then a strong social model would be like, you need to accommodate like every single thing for this person, and they should not be expected at any time to conform themselves to the people around them. But then a more balanced approach is the neurodiversity approach, where they're saying that disability is a product of an interaction between the characteristics of a neurodivergent person and their environment around them, but that it can be addressed by reshaping the society, but also by changing the individual and teaching them adaptive skills. There's like a happy medium,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. And that word adaptive really comes up a lot in the literature, and actually, even in like children's clothing, if you can believe it or not.
Really?
But yeah, the term adaptive really just means like accommodation. Like, like, okay, perfect. You were a fitness instructor. When you say
Yeah.
that you're going to modify this
Oh,
thing,
yeah.
it's sort of like, so this is like a garment that like opens on the side so that it's
Yeah.
easier. It's a like a,
Yeah. Like
what did
adaptive.
they actually
Yeah.
call? Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
adapting the use, but it's
Yes.
doing the same thing. It's
Yes.
just more usable for that person.
Yes.
So like, it still looks like a shirt. So society is like, great, you're wearing a shirt, but I put my shirt on from the side.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Awesome.
that was actually a really good example.
Yes, it was. Woohoo! And that's part of what we're trying to do, I feel like, on, again, this podcast. It's not only like giving people the knowledge and confidence to ask for accommodations, and to try to help them develop an adaptive skill or direct them to where they can get an adaptive skill or what adaptive skills they might need. Like, that is what we're trying to do here. But at the same time, we're also trying to lower stigma on different neurodivergencies, and to try to be like, yeah, they are not a disorder, they're not like something that needs to go away. So I feel like on this show we are trying to put into practice in real life this neurodiversity approach.
Yeah, and I will be keeping the name Neurodivergent Report, just because like, I want everybody to love divergence and
Yeah.
deviance.
Yeah.
Maybe my enthusiasm for deviance will be contagious. Let's find out.
Divergence is beautiful. Divergence is like what keeps the human race going, like in all aspects of the human genome. So heck yeah.
But yeah, so really we need to talk about the epistemic injustices still, and we need to talk about the cognitive stuff. But in order to talk about the cognitive stuff, we need to talk about the 4E. So
Okay.
yeah,
Where do you want to start?
4E.
I think it just like we're talking about what neurodiversity is. Like we talk about like we talk about ASD, but like this like these are examples basically of how neurodivergent brains are different than neurotypical.
Yes. So, well, because in order to move on, we have to talk about this, the differences in cognition. I think up to this point, we've sort of just been getting clear on what they think. But 4E isn't really their idea. It's sort of something that honestly we had to go and look a little bit more into on our own because the paper isn't super clear about the definition. Um,
Mhm.
but we pieced it all together.
Yes.
Jay, do you want to give us
A
what
breakdown.
is what is 4E theory?
So, yeah, 4E is the extended cognition perspective. So 4E is talking about four different dimensions that all happen to start with E that
Hmm.
that are the differences in cognition between a neurodivergent brain and a neurotypical brain. Um, those
Hmm.
four um, those four differences are embodied, embedded, extended, and inactive. And we're going to kind of go through like an example of each of those.
Yeah, so basically this different cognitive framework is meant to show that brains process information differently in these different ways.
Mhm.
Yeah. So embodied ADHD. I'm a super embodied ADHD person. Like you can't see this video, but we've just been rocking and moving and like
Yeah.
shifting in our seat and stuff. You might be able to hear the difference in my voice. Like
Yeah.
but it's just the idea that people with ADHD can focus better when they're moving.
Mhm.
They can self-regulate better when they're allowing their body to move in the natural ways that it wants to move.
And
Um,
same with autism too, with stimming. With
yeah,
that could be a
exactly.
self-soothing thing, but yeah.
It, so I think that's really the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, of
yeah,
course it can be self-soothing, but inherently fidgeting is
regulating.
also a self-soothing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great reminder.
I definitely feel like I have a tendency, especially like, I mean, I'm aware that I'm on camera right now, and I definitely have a tendency, I feel like, to like bring things like in and to not be doing that. But it's definitely the kind of thing where I know that I like sometimes like especially if I was like in like hardcore corporate America culture, I would just really prefer to have my camera off just so that I could feel like I could be paying attention better. But
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
like looking. Yeah, sometimes I get distracted looking at myself just to make sure I'm masking correctly.
Yeah. Oh my
Um,
God. Yes. Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
um, sort of like the embedded cognition is sort of the idea that your environment makes a huge freaking difference in how you're able to think.
Mhm.
So people with ADHD might love being in a super chaotic room, um, although some of us really don't.
Yeah.
Um,
It's either, like, they feel understimulated in a non-chaotic environment, or they could be overstimulated in a super chaotic environment. That kind of balance is different for each
mm,
person, so yeah.
yeah, that's super true, and that's why it's so complex.
Yeah,
Um, to even suggest like grounding routines that would work for you because not
yeah,
there's no one size fits all.
right.
Enacted cognition is sort of like teaching while you're doing it kind of thing, like
Mm.
talking things out
Oh my
is
God.
definitely something that I need.
Yeah, yeah.
My husband hates it so much. He's like, why can't you just do things in your brain?
Yeah, I am the same way with my fiance. Like basically like we've known each other now for like 5 or 6 years. So it's the kind of thing where it's so nice to have someone who understands. Like Julia's just kind of going off on something right now, and the things that she says, she doesn't even really like, it's not like she's saying them with conviction. She's just trying to talk it out.
And then this last one really made us sort of like, ooh, when we were going over the notes beforehand, because like at first I was like, extended cognition. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't super make sense. But it basically just means that sometimes neurodivergents need to offload cognition. So, like, extend their cognitive capabilities beyond what their brain is able to do. So, like,
Yes.
that's why we need our calendar. That's why we need our reminder app or
Right.
whatever that tool is that you rely on. Like, and if you don't have one, I'll pray for you to find
Yeah. I
one
mean,
quickly.
yeah, it's just like
No,
things.
please DM me and I'll help you find one. No,
Yeah.
code red.
Code red, guys. Um, Yeah, it's like the thing where, like you have a thought in your head and then it just pops away, even if you really are trying to think so hard about it. There's just a million things happening a minute, and It's not always
Literally
gonna
a
stay there.
million things happening a second, please.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Give yourself a break. It's
Ugh.
your brain was not designed to capture everything. Our
Yeah.
brains were designed to filter out the extra stimuli. But what
Mhm.
happened to neurodivergence is that some of us are conditioned to filter out different stimuli than others. And so
Yes.
right now, what we're filtering, what we're picking up is not considered normal behavior in
Mhm.
society,
Mhm.
because somebody decided so when they came up with society.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I sort of got away from myself, but I think that this was good.
Yes, I think so too.
I'm just going to stop.
Yeah.
I'm info dumping, and so that's
All
good.
this is all so relevant to a big part of this paper, which is epistemic injustice.
The distribution of resources, y'all. Yeah.
Like, and we can go more into it, but just the idea that like the majority is going to be benefiting in society mostly, and it's the same thing with like what we call neurotypical, or that normative group. They're going to be the ones deciding what society is like, and not even in necessarily a malicious
Mhm.
way, but just because that's how they work and that's how like the majority of them work, so they're going to do something that works for the majority to create rules and structure.
I'm not super convinced that it's even the majority. Think
Mm,
it's I think it's a product of the people who were doctors when they were coming up with all of these
mm,
disciplines, and the types of people that they allowed to basically write all of the theory.
mm.
It was a very limited uh archetype of person.
Yeah.
We're talking like the rich white man.
Right. Right.
So,
Which
yeah,
is so
I mean,
it's like it's just this is such a side thing, but it's so funny because I feel like at least the current stereotype of like a scholar or like a professor or like a
so
researcher is
autistic,
like the person.
right?
Oh my god, like, oh my god, so autistic, so ADHD, just like I'm like, like you're super interested in this one thing, you deep dive into it, you might be all over the place and have all these different papers, like the quirky like professor. Like that's I feel like the current stereotype of like a scholar and a researcher. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So, this paper also talks about sort of epistemic injustice in general, and like all of the, because they were looking at other literature that already exists. So they quote a bunch of different people's work into like issues on sexism, like movements on racism, but epistemic injustice rarely, or they actually say have yet to incorporate
Mm,
neurodiversity. And I think that that's starting to shift in the community. I think I've been seeing a lot of talk lately about the hydra of racism and capitalism and ableism, and how all three of those prop each other up.
mhm.
um, and so that's sort of the epistemic injustice that we're talking about here. Like, what is equal distribution of resources? Is it everyone has the same amount of apples, or everybody has the number of apples they need to feel full? Like,
Well,
what are
yeah,
we
so like
talking here?
equality versus equity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And it makes me wonder if we've been so focused lately on doing charity work in society that we've stopped focusing on justice work.
Mm,
We're so
mhm.
focused on trying to make sure everyone is getting what they need. We've stopped focusing on forcing the society to provide everyone with what they
Right.
need. Well, now
Right.
we're looking for churches and nonprofit organizations to provide people what they should already be getting from
Right.
working a 40-hour job.
Yeah.
Um, but like, let's keep pathologizing the person and why they're so
Right.
disorganized, and they
Right.
can't keep their three different schedules focused. Well,
Oh,
let's do that.
that
So
sounds great.
anyway, the
Yeah.
neurodiversity paradigm.
Yes. That sounds great to that Hydra
um,
specifically. I'm sure the Hydra is all into that, but
well, it's interesting because we see much higher rates of neurodivergence in Western, industrialized,
mm,
European, like Eurocentric
yeah.
countries.
Yeah.
Um, US, Australia, UK. We're
Mhm.
seeing almost like a third, literally,
Wow.
of people now being diagnosed. Obviously, like every study is going to have a different rate specifically, but we're seeing like astronomical increases,
Yeah.
and all the experts are starting to panic, like, oh no, what's going on? And I think we're all just starting to be honest about what we're experiencing
Mhm.
as a result of how our lives are structured.
Mhm. Yeah.
And also, we're all experiencing large scale change right now,
Yeah.
widespread grief right now.
But, like, this doesn't mean that, like, the only people that are struggling are people who are neurodivergent. Like, this kind of system isn't good for anybody, no matter what your neurotype
Yes.
is. Like, but I think
Yes.
it's creating like I heard I honestly I think it was this is such like a niche thing, and this might be wrong. I'm pretty sure this was Conan O'Brien on Michelle Obama's podcast, like in 2023, maybe. And he said something about relationships that actually relates to this. And I'm pretty sure I got my source right.
You're
Um,
the perfect.
Uh, so he was saying about like relationships and how like pressure on relationships is taking like a birdhouse and shaking it. And if it's not a well constructed birdhouse, it can probably do fine. But if you actually like, put it through a storm or start shaking it, like the screws and stuff will fall out. And it's this is such a perfect one to one where it's like, this is showing how poorly the bird box is built and the screws that maybe didn't fit into the right holes are the first ones that you're going to hear, but it's not like it's good for the rest of the bird box either. Birdhouse.
Love that so much.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm going to go find out if that was the accurate thing. And if it was,
Yeah.
I'm going to at them both.
Heck yeah.
Hey, Conan.
Hey guys.
Knock, knock.
Michelle, come on the show.
Yeah, that's the exact kind of like impulsivity that makes neurodivergent brains successful.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes that sort of like help us, if we're
You're-
brave enough to
Yes.
follow the impulse,
Yes.
sometimes we're gonna experience reward for that.
Yeah.
And
It's like
sometimes we're gonna get turned down, but like such is life.
it's oh man, you're grasping at something right now. The idea that characteristics are more advantageous depending on the context. And like in this context right now, like me being more impulsive and not being totally sure of what it was, but being pretty sure and just giving it a go and just testing to see like if this lands. Cause I could have just said something and we just cut it from the podcast. But I'm
Yeah.
like, in this case, it worked out. There are plenty of cases though where if I were to do that, it would not be advantageous to me. And the same can go about really any characteristic, which is again why it's important to have diversity in the human genome, including our brains and the way that like we function because it impacts everything we do and who we are. um yeah.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. I got the mic right here. I'm not gonna drop it though.
And cut. So good. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to wrap up and say, since it's not the typical research paper, we can't talk about like limitations or specific outcomes or anything like that. Again, theoretical.
Literature review, I believe, right?
Kind of. I mean, they reviewed literature and then wrote a paper about it.
This was published in an academic journal. They were citing other published pieces. Like I'm
Totally.
not sure we made that clear in the beginning.
There's a huge reference list here.
Yes.
I don't speak French, so I can't even say like most of these names. And like, I mean, I guess one thing that we didn't sort of talk about is how all of the different ways, all of the different cognitive profiles, or what they're calling cognitive resources, when people are establishing metrics that you need to pass under, but they don't have the same kind of brain as you, they might develop metrics that you can't possibly meet. And that's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's just because they're not thinking about the resources that you need to complete the task,
Right.
being different from the resources that they need to complete the task.
Yeah.
And so that's really where the whole injustice and the cognitive differences comes in. It all comes together because people just aren't considering other people. And we can change that.
Yes, because that's the whole thing. Like I don't want to like demonize someone who can't, because to some extent we all do this. Like it's hard to fathom what somebody else needs without
Mhm.
talking to them or
Sure.
without just knowing that that exists. So it's like, you know what I
Communication
mean?
and
Yes.
connection is really a part of being able to accommodate someone.
What was that quote from the beginning? The quote from the beginning, you can do a
That
whole lot.
feelings are manageable and mentionable.
Mentionable. And that is the basis on how we know that other people need different things from us. Because there's truly no way, like, why would you ever assume that somebody is experiencing something in a different way if it's never mentioned or they
Perception
suppress.
is so weird. So next week, so the next time we come back to do a research paper, we're going to be talking about the neurodiversity approaches, what they are, and what do they mean for researchers. So it's going to be a continuation of the conversation of the medical model, the neurodiversity model, and it's going to give us some more specifics on how to accommodate specifically those different cognitive types, I think. So if you like this, please let us know. Please listen. And yeah, we're gonna do another episode on
Yeah.
how to do.
How to do. How to do.
Yeah.
And just feel free, I feel too, just to like reach out to us and start a conversation. Like if you're listening to us on a platform where there is a comment section, like we would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear if you agree.
Love to know who's listening, where people are listening. That's so
Yeah, like
cool.
I feel like I mean I would love to like establish a community and a conversation, you know? But
Yeah.
yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. Like, especially if you related to anything that we said about the specific, like the 4 E's. Have you ever heard of it? Let us know. We'll see you next time. Thank you for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. Please. You can check out ndreportpod.com for more information, or if you want to be a guest contributor. Until next time, be well, do good.